Hello, my name is Nara Movsisan, and today I will be presenting my policy problem regarding alcohol advertising for the Philosophy, Politics, and Economics seminar class. Let's take a look at problem number 1, billboard advertisements that contain promotional material of alcohol on the roads. Now, billboard advertisements themselves are a highly effective form of marketing. They have high exposure, high visibility rates, and end up targeting mainly drivers, since drivers must naturally keep their eyes on the road at all times and they cannot avoid seeing these types of advertisements. Additionally, it may also cause mental association between drinking and driving. And finally, billboard advertisements do not have any regulatory system, which means that we cannot control who sees these types of advertisements. So, which means that passengers are also likely to see these advertisements and be affected by them. Now, a problematic and a vulnerable group in this category of passengers are specifically minors who end up seeing commercials which are essentially targeted at adults. Now let's take a look at some of the statistics, which says that 30% of all fatal road accidents included intoxication by at least one of the drivers. And then we have 66% of passengers who recall seeing out-of-home external advertisements. Now this includes passengers from all types of transportation, such as buses, taxis, and private cars, etc. Which also shows that passengers do in fact pay attention to the advertisements that they see on the roads. Let's take a look at problem number 2, which are the placements of alcoholic commercials on media, such as TV or radio channels, which target adults at the highest times of consumption and have no regulation based on weekdays or events. Now, I will talk about the specific time regulation in the current policies section. However, let's note that adults are more likely to indulge in alcohol during the later time of the day, during the weekends, and certain sporting events. And with the current regulations, do not take into account any of these factors and end up targeting adults during the times when they are more likely to consume alcohol. Now, consumption of alcohol may be nudged by this even further. And consumption of alcohol is related to higher risks of domestic violence. Let's take a look at the statistics that indicate that. So statistics show that 55% of all offenders of domestic violence cases drank alcohol prior to the assault. And as for the sporting events, there's a relation between a sporting event enjoying popularity among a population and domestic and non-domestic violence. So research has been done which compared cities that have similar domestic and non-domestic violence rates. The only difference being that one city enjoys popularity of a certain sport as a cultural phenomenon, and the other does not have that same affection towards that particular sport. So statistics showed that after the said sporting event, there was a 40% and 70% increase in domestic and non-domestic violence rates, respectively. In contrary, with the city where the sporting event was not that popular and the domestic and non-domestic violence rates stayed the same. So promoting alcohol during sporting events will likely cause more consumption of alcohol, and which is likely to lead more towards more of a violent behavior. And finally, let's take a look at the current policies. Now, I've divided them into three main categories. The first one being the content regulations. So advertisements of alcohol are not allowed to portray alcohol to be something beneficial, to have therapeutic or relaxing abilities, to be beneficial towards your social status. They are not allowed to encourage excessive drinking, as well as to promote the alcohol percentage in their beverage as something positive. The second category is the timing and audience one. So they're not allowed to directly target minors or portray people that are younger than 25. And as mentioned before, the only regulation regarding timing placements are the prohibition of alcohol commercials between 6 a.m. and 10:30 p.m. for the TV and radio channels. And as for the last category, the location one, advertising firms are not allowed to display alcoholic commercials near places that are regularly visited by minors, such as schools, cultural centers, training centers, etc., as well as in print media, such as magazines or journals. Now, let's take a look at the alternatives that I'm offering to the current policy. The first one would be to expand the location restrictions. Simply put, it would be to ban all sorts of alcohol commercials that are displayed on the billboards. The second one would be to expand the timing restrictions. Now, what I mean by this is to conduct a statistical research for the Armenian market specifically to understand what are the highest consumption days in Armenia, as well as to ban alcohol commercials altogether during major sporting events that are being broadcasted on TV, for example. And the third alternative is not an extension towards the current policy, it's more of an addition. The suggestion is to implement mandatory health warnings on all forms of alcohol commercials, similarly to what is done to products that contain tobacco, in order to promote a more informative consumption and to protect minors and youth in case they do come across alcohol advertisements, to be more informed. So finally, let's compare the alternative in the political, economical, and philosophical ways. So first up, all of the alternatives mentioned above will most likely face opposition from advertising firms and alcohol producing companies, since they are likely to record losses in their revenues after the implementation of the alternatives. And they're all likely to be supported by public health organizations because the alternatives are aiming to will have a side effect, let's say, of a reduction in consumption in general. So public health organizations are likely to support the initiative. As for the economic aspect, alternative number one, the prohibition of alcoholic commercials on billboards, it's not costly to implement and does not require any major infrastructural changes. The pros, of course, being the savings of public health funds because of reduced road accidents or any related alcohol harms. And the cons would be losses in the advertising industry since they would be losing clientele. The second alternative, which was the expansion of the timing restriction, on the contrary, would be costly and would require infrastructural changes since it would require constant data collection, which is highly expensive, and would also, as for the infrastructural changes, would require regulation from TV channels and radio channels to constantly update their databases based on the sporting events calendar to exclude advertising commercials from the lists. Of course, again, the pros would be to in the savings of public health funds associated with alcohol harms and domestic violence. And finally, the third alternative would not be costly to implement mandatory health warnings on all types of commercials. However, it would require infrastructural changes and additional regulations to be placed to make sure the alternative is being followed. The pros, again, would be savings in the public health funds. However, there's a major con as for losses in the alcohol market. So some alcohol producing companies might choose to leave the Armenian market altogether because they do not agree to display health warnings on their commercials. And finally, as for the philosophical consideration, all of the alternatives mentioned above have the best interest of the public in mind and do not have any moral hazards. However, some may argue that it is a restriction on the freedom of speech in the advertising industry. Finally, based on these considerations, I chose alternative number one, since it does not require any immense costs and immense funds. It protects both drivers and the youth, and has potential to decrease drinking and driving. Now, finally, as for the action plan, the development of the alternative is based purely on estimates to write up the policy, to collaborate with public health organizations, and to finally present it to the Armenian government. And the approval of the policy usually takes about 6 to 7 months in Armenia. And the final process would be a complete implementation, would take about 1 year to give, it's also based on estimates, to give some time to advertising firms to find other companies to replace their billboards with or to completely remove them, etc. And some challenges associated with this are the lack of statistics for the Armenian market. And so overall, I've given 2 years for the entire action plan in order to go collect the necessary data, to develop the policy, to for it to go through the approval policy and to be implemented. So here are the references, and that's it. Thank you.